Celsius across the southeast of England. Through Thursday afternoon and into the evening time, we're just going to have to watch this area of heavy rain moving in off the North Sea, affecting parts of northern England, southern Scotland. This pushing its way westwards overnight. Elsewhere during the early hours into Friday morning, we'll see a mixture of clear spells and still the risk of some scattered showers. Generally warm night, again temperatures 13 to 15 Celsius in the towns and cities, perhaps dipping into single figures in the countryside. So we've got this area of cloud and outbreaks of rain swirling around the northwest of the UK through Friday. It should start to ease later on in the day, but still the risk across eastern Scotland. Some heavy downpours here. Elsewhere, another day of sunny spells and scattered showers, some of these heavy and thundery. Perhaps drier as we head into the weekend initially before further rain arrives later. And overall temperatures still reaching the low 20s.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales
and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
In Prime Minister's Questions, as Liz Truss has her first full day as Prime Minister, she's asked a series of questions by Sir Keir Starmer. For the first time in donkey's years, there is a clear ideological divide at the heart of British politics. But we'll debate with a great range of guests who won the first round. And I'll be joined on Talking Pints by Lord Norton. He is a fan of the House of Lords. I am not. It should be a very good chat. But before all of that, let's get the news with Poddy Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening to you. Liz Truss says she's going to announce a package of support to help people deal with rising energy prices tomorrow. During her first Prime Minister's questions, she refused to introduce a windfall tax on energy companies, saying it would discourage investment. But the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, accused her of protecting company profits instead of helping families.
Is she really telling us that she's going to leave these vast excess profits on the table and make working people foot the bill for decades to come?
I, as Prime Minister, will take immediate action to help people with the cost of their energy bills, and I will be making an announcement to this House on that tomorrow.
Well, in other news today, the Queen has postponed a meeting of the Privy Council after being advised by her doctors to take some rest. Buckingham Palace said the latest advice didn't involve a hospital stay, and the meeting, which was supposed to take place tonight, can be rescheduled. Her Majesty remains at Balmoral Castle, where she was pictured yesterday inviting Liz Truss to become Prime Minister. Now, 10 animal rights protesters have been arrested after vandalising Parliament with white paint. The group, calling themselves Animal Rebellion, want Liz Truss to take action on dairy farming, which they say worsens climate change. Some of the activists also glued themselves to the pavement outside the Palace of Westminster shortly before Prime Minister's questions. Now, video has been posted on social media showing a waterlogged inflatable boat full of people in the English Channel. Yesterday, official sources warned that Albanian organised crime gangs and people smugglers are risking lives by putting unseaworthy boats into the water in bad weather conditions. The TikTok post showed a small dinghy full of young men with their legs submerged in water. It's not clear when the video was filmed. Royal Mail workers have voted to stage a further 48-hour strike at the end of September. It follows another 48-hour strike scheduled to take place from tomorrow. 115,000 members of the Communication Workers Union plan to walk out. They're protesting against an imposed 2% pay rise offer, which they say amounts to a real terms wage cut because of soaring inflation. The union has warned there could be more industrial action if the deadlock isn't broken. And the movie theatre chain Cineworld has filed for bankruptcy in the United States as they seek time to restructure. The company has filed for Chapter 11, which means Cineworld's US, UK and Jersey businesses are affected. They hope to emerge from bankruptcy in the first quarter of next year, they say. Its shares are expected to continue trading on the London Stock Exchange. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You are with GB News tonight, where it's time for Farage.
Good evening. It was Liz Truss's first full day as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and of course at midday there she was at the dispatch box, Prime Minister's questions, up of course against the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer. How would she fare? Many have said she's not that good as an orator, she isn't that quick on her feet. And of course Sir Keir is a practised lawyer, practised barrister, practised QC. Well, it was interesting because what we saw today was somebody who'd gone to the electorate, albeit just 172,000 of them, but had gone to the electorate and was actually sticking to her guns. Let's have a look at this on the question of windfall taxes.
When she said in her leadership campaign that she was against windfall taxes, did she mean it?
Yeah. I am against a windfall tax. I believe it is the wrong thing to be putting companies off investing in the United Kingdom just when we need to be growing the economy. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that this country will not be able to tax its way to growth.
Goodness gracious me, I haven't heard a Conservative speak like that in 40 years. Certainly Johnny Major would never have done it, and nor would anybody else since him. Here is a Conservative leader who believes in free market economics, up against a Labour leader who says the energy companies are making excess profits, we should tax them, rather than ordinary folk picking up the bills, and all our problems would be solved. Now, whichever side of this debate you agree with, something happened today rather magical, rather special. We actually had two party leaders giving completely alternative views of where they stood to the British electorate. There was clear blue water. There was clarity. Frankly, we haven't seen that in absolutely years. That, I think, is a very, very good thing. I also thought, and it may well have been a pre-prepared line, but I also thought at one moment Liz Truss was actually quite funny. Theresa May got up, as she does tend to do, and said, well, you know, isn't it remarkable that the third female Prime Minister is a Conservative? This is how Liz Truss responded.
It is quite extraordinary, isn't it, that there doesn't seem to be the ability in the Labour Party to find a female leader, or indeed a leader who doesn't come from North London. Yeah.
Now, I think that was really quite good and quite funny. Pre-scripted or not, it wasn't bad. So my question to you tonight is, who won round one? Farage at gbnews.uk. Now, for my money, on energy, she was nowhere clear enough. What she should have said was, we are not going to impose extra taxes on the energy companies. What we are going to do is make them reinvest in the British economy, produce tens of thousands of jobs, and to make sure we're self-sufficient in energy by the time of the next general election. Didn't hear that. She also, once again, and my goodness me, this is a hostage to fortune, said in PMQs that by the time of the next election, we will all be able to get GP appointments. And frankly, with an exploding population, and without radical reform, I'm not sure that's true. But on the whole, I have to say, I thought she did pretty bloomin' well today. I really did. Let's come over to Downing Street and join our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, good evening. My view was she performed perhaps rather better than might have been expected in terms of the way she carried herself, but she stuck to her guns in a way that Boris Johnson never would have done.
Yeah, I completely agree in many regards, Nigel. It was pretty confident, pretty self-assured performance from Liz Truss. Now, in many ways, we probably shouldn't be surprised by that. She spent an awful lot of time at that dispatch box. Up until yesterday, she had been the longest-serving current cabinet minister, so she is used to that. But PMQs is another playing field altogether, and she did step up to the mark, I felt, today, with straightforward answers on actual policies you have rightly pointed out, and even quite effective at times with those pithy remarks. All I would say, though, was it a little bit duller than we're normally used to. None of the flowery language and the charisma we got from Boris Johnson, almost certainly. But maybe, Nigel, that's actually what voters want in these serious times, is a real reflection on serious policy being debated. And as you say, a proper choice, not just on personality now for voters, but also on ideology too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, you know, when Boris Johnson was challenged on windfall taxes, he just collapsed and did what the Labour Party wanted. It's pretty clear to me Liz Truss will not. And yeah, you may be right. There may not be the showmanship when Boris was there, but it was a very interesting debate. Now, something else that has happened today. In the wake of a government that has very, very few Rishi Sunak supporters, and that really was very, very clear. She's picked her own team. That's the decision she's taken. But I was fascinated to hear this morning that the British Bill of Rights, Dominic Raab's much vaunted British Bill of Rights, which was due to have its second reading next week, which I have to say, I always thought was a complete dog's dinner and wouldn't do anything, in my opinion, to sort out our relationship with the ECHR. That is going to be dropped. So do we have any idea what Suella Braverman is going to put in its place?
In one word, no, Nigel, is the honest answer. This is all a massive mess for the government. As you say, the British Bill of Rights, the idea that Dominic Raab had come up with was a way of trying to curb the influence of the European Court of Human Rights on our society, on decisions that are made in courts, to try and promote free speech, try and allow the deportation of foreign criminals, allow maybe even the Rwanda policy, which has been challenged, of course, in the European Court of Human Rights, to go ahead.
Yeah.
But it is all a very legal mess. It is effectively being dropped by the government today. And in the end, they say that they're reflecting on this. They're looking at it. Brandon Lewis, the Justice Secretary, is going to review it, that they are clear they want to go forward on this. And Suella Braverman, as you've rightly pointed out, is someone as the Home Secretary who's even hinted at leaving the European Convention on Human Rights altogether, though I think that's pretty unlikely. But for many others, even some senior Conservatives, they're now saying, because of parliamentary time, this well could all be dead. And it is a bit of a blow, I would suggest, to the government, given the fact that they've made such an issue over the last couple of years, and even Liz Truss over the summer, about trying to tackle this issue of the influence that the European Court of Human Rights has on our legislative process, on our court system here in Britain. The idea, of course, of the British Human Rights Act, essentially, was to give supremacy to a large degree to Parliament, or indeed to our Supreme Court. And that is all now, tonight, in tatters.
Fascinating. Darren, thank you very much indeed. And they keep talking about the British Bill of Rights and how we can overrule the ECHR, but we're bound to ECHR by an international treaty. Now, those of you who watch this programme regularly will know I've been asking a lot of questions over the course of this leadership contest about who Liz Truss really is. And I forgive her when her parents took her on Maggie Out demonstrations, she was a kid. But as an adult, she was an active Liberal Democrat. She called for the abolition of the monarchy, amongst many other things. She was a Remainer. She supported Theresa May's dreadful sellout 3 times in a row. And suddenly, there seems to be this remarkable Damascene conversion. She is a born-again Brexiteer and free marketeer. Well, how much of this is genuine? How much of this has perhaps always been there? Well, Mark Littlewood is Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs, has known Liz Truss for a very long time. And you yourself, of course, a former Liberal Democrat, I think was a press officer for the party and all the rest of it. Tell us how much you know about Liz Truss going back.
Well, I first met her at university. I'm a few years older than her, but we would have been members of the Oxford University Liberal Democrats at the same time. So you might say, Nigel, that I'm going to defend her because I've been on the same sort of political journey.
Yes,
right? I'm
okay.
kind of born-again Brexiteer. But so perhaps I look at that through my own sort of changes of policy position. But I actually think she's been an awful lot more consistent if you're trying to get to what's under the skin, what's her underlying beliefs. She's always been hates vested interests, sceptical of the establishment, doesn't like the state being too big, wants to see a transfer of power away from political institutions to ordinary men and women.
These are things that Liberals used to support.
Exactly. And she's much more sort of on social freedom. She's very liberal as well. She doesn't think the government should tell you whether you can drink, smoke, how much coffee you can have and all of that sort of stuff. She's quite libertarian on that sort of thing. Always has been. Now, you have to apply that to changing circumstances. And with regard to the EU, I went through a similar sort of journey. We can argue about the history of this, but when the single market came in, I was like, well, this could actually be quite a liberalising free market kind of phenomenon. Gradually, the EU just became a regulatory nightmare, though, and I think Truss went through the same sort of thinking as well. On the referendum itself, she plumped for the Remain side, but I think that was an agonising decision and uncharacteristically cautious of her. She nearly always takes the higher risk option. Okay. That was one case in her career where she did not.
So on, taxes, I mean, as I said before, when Johnson was really pushed hard on windfall taxes, he just flew the white flag and did what Starmer demanded. So this belief in a smaller state and lower taxes is genuine, yeah?
Absolutely genuine. She thinks taxes are way too high. Where she actually gets to as a destination, I don't know, but the trajectory, the direction of travel is going to be clear.
The courage to fight the civil service and all of that. Windfall taxes. It was being presented today by both Keir Starmer and the SNP that, well, hang on a second, you want the public to pick up the bill. We're saying the companies should pick up the bill. How effective would a windfall tax now be on our energy companies, in your opinion, as Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs?
It's a very effective soundbite. It's not effective economics at all. It's a very, very poor way of trying to raise money. Firstly, it generates a huge amount of uncertainty. Who's next? If I want to come and invest in Britain in a different sector and I make what the SNP or Labour consider to be excessive profits, do I get a special tax all for me and my investment? And Liz did make that point at Prime Minister's questions. We need a good environment for investment. And politicians second-guessing what counts as an excessive profit is very bad news. Also, there's this quaint idea that sort of companies, big corporations can pay taxes and human beings don't have to. All of these taxes basically get passed on. There'll be loads of people, perhaps even without knowing it, who've got their pensions invested in energy companies. And if the profits... Millions. So the profits fall, the rates of return fall, the pensions of ordinary people fall. Now it's presented as if it's only multi-billionaires who will be making any losses.
So I presume, when I ask you the question, who won round one, your answer?
I was very impressed with Truss, not just in her answers to, and you said at the top of the show, Nigel, I tweeted, when was the last time a Prime Minister from the dispatch box defended lower taxation? You have to go back to Thatcher, I think.
You literally do.
And that was a breath of fresh air. But I also thought that her performance was quite good. I was worried that she'd be a bit stilted, stumble over her words. Not at all. Straightforward. Answered the questions. I think there was one question that was asked and she just stood up and said no and sat down or something.
Well, we really can't be doing with all this. Answering questions and coming up with ideology. I mean, it's going to ruin the whole thing, isn't it?
Quite a shift in British politics.
Thank you for joining us here on GB News. Well, what about the Labour perspective on all of this? I mean, Sir Keir Starmer is, we know, an absolutely steady, solid, perhaps unspectacular performer, but he's clearly very good at what he does in the sense that he did it for a living for many, many years. I wonder, were the Labour Party just a little bit taken aback by just how forthright she was, defending ideas. Now, she was appealing to 172,000 Conservative Party members, and people in politics are very, very good at saying what's necessary for that particular audience. Would she soften? Would she change that position when she got to the House of Commons? And I just wonder whether Keir Starmer thought she may have been even a little bit shocked that she didn't. Well, I'm joined by John McTiernan, former political secretary to Tony Blair. It's been a fascinating day in British politics. Amazing. Genuine divide, genuine, difference. And what I loved about it was both sides argued passionately for what they believed in, and it's up to the public ultimately at the next election to make their minds up. Who do you think won round one?
I actually think the public won because they got a choice. And I think it's really important that they see passion on both sides, completely different attitudes to taxation, completely different views of growth, completely different views about who will pay for the cost of capping energy prices. So I really think that. I think Liz Truss did exactly what I thought. She was short, she was sharp, she was clear, and she was funny, which I think people hadn't fully expected.
No, I hadn't.
Both spontaneously and also some was rehearsed. And Keir Starmer was direct, asking a question and getting a direct answer. It's the one he wanted. Will you favour a windfall tax? And she comes out, no, repudiates it. So that's really, it sets up perfectly for tomorrow, the big announcement on energy.
Yeah. Do you think Liz Truss is an easier or a harder opponent than Boris Johnson?
So I think they're different. So you can never out Boris. You can't be funnier, you can't be bigger, you can't be wafflier. And what you could also see was that Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer both disliked each other. I've not seen a real active personal dislike in the House for a very long time. Whereas I think Liz and Keir may well end up respecting each other. The one thing he avoided was the trap that Rishi Sunak fell into, which is looking like a clever man patronising a woman. Because Liz Truss is simple in what she says, not simplistic, and Sunak tried to mansplain. Keir avoided that, and I think that was well done.
Yes, you're right. Pinning Boris Johnson down, rather like nailing blancmange to the ceiling, because he'd tell a joke or make a classical analogy. Exactly. It was very, very difficult to pin him down. So, is this ideological divide, is this here to stay, in your opinion? Are these battle lines now drawn between now and the next election?
They are, and my advice to Labour leadership would be find a way that you can name something the Truss tax. She'll go on about there being cutting taxes and this and that, but find something that households realise is a Truss tax. So if she decides to borrow money, to give loans to companies, which then companies pay back by charging all of us households extra money for a decade, that's a Truss tax.
Yeah, she's not cutting taxes on companies. Keir was saying you're cutting corporation tax. She's just not going to increase corporation tax.
And people are open to the idea of windfall taxes on companies. She said they won't do that. I'm not sure people are that happy with the idea that they may get a capped energy price now, but for 10 years or 15 years, they'll be paying back on the never. They'll be paying back that increase to make sure the energy companies...
Paying back for furlough, paying back for everything.
But paying back to the government through taxation is quite different from every month you're billed to EDF,
so that is the strong
Truss tax.
That is the strong Labour pitch.
I think so.
Yeah, interesting. John McTiernan, thank you very much indeed. Well, John's view very much was that the public won today, and it's actually quite difficult in some ways to disagree with that analysis. Now, Conservative Home is where so many opinions within the Conservative Party are aired, and they're never frightened on that platform of being critical of the party. William Atkinson is the assistant editor. So it's been a heck of a couple of days.
Yes, I've had a busy week so far, Nigel.
I should think so. To start with, virtually all the Sunakites gone.
Yes.
Just gone.
Yeah.
The sort of ideological night of the long knives that has gone on in Downing Street. How does that leave division within the party? Because, to be fair, she won by a much smaller margin than many were predicting.
Yeah, including us, actually, from our much vaunted survey.
What was your guesstimate?
I actually thought it would be around 57-43, just because I'm not saying, because I'm such a great political predictor,
yes.
but also because I think seeing those events, when she basically gave up campaigning about 2 or 3 weeks before the end and started prepping for government, whereas Sunak was still trying to go and maximise every single vote, and I think he did much better on the hustings, etc. So I think he was a much better performer. I think he was a much better campaigner. If this election had gone on for another month, who knows? But I think certainly, I think we overestimated just how well she would do, and we misunderestimated how many people would don't knows, and then how they would actually break.
And the differences between the two candidates actually were, I mean, it was quite personal at times. How divided is the Conservative Party, given that the Sunakites are cast out into the cold?
I think it's a very difficult territory we're entering in terms of party unity. And I'm not one of those people who sort of says, we must put party unity before everything else because the Conservative Party must be united going forward. No, I like a bit of debate. I like a bit of division because that's actually how you generate ideas, which, of course, is one of the many problems with Truss's current cabinet, is that it has people who are loyal to her, ideologically aligned with her, but not necessarily people who are going to challenge her when they think that she's going wrong. And I think we've got at this point more people who've formerly been on the front bench, more people who've actively campaigned against her, etc., on the backbenches than at any time since perhaps the dying days of New Labour. And that's never good for party unity, but that's never also good for the stability of a government. So you've got a lot of people there on the backbenches who previously held big roles, who also have leadership ambitions, who are waiting for her to stumble. And when she stumbles, they will be sure to pick up on it.
Yeah, the party's not in that great a health in that sense. But in terms of today, the first big outing, the first big bout, we've discussed already in the first 20 minutes the ideological differences, and you can see the sort of tram lines of the arguments and where we're going. I mean, the one thing about Truss I don't know is she's got the big textbook ideas. We'll have to see about delivery. But as leader of the party, as Prime Minister of the country, did she win the first round?
I think she did a very good performance. I would say that she won in the short term, but will not necessarily win in the long term from the sort of performance she gave today. She was very good at trotting out the sort of lines that Tory MPs love, whether it's defending low taxes, as you said, pretty much the first Tory leader to do that at PMQs for about 40-odd years. But also that comment about Labour not having a female leader, continually picking people from North London. As somebody from North London, I say there's nothing wrong with being from North London, but if, Labour might start to decide to pick from a larger pool when it actually comes to trying to appeal the country and win a general election. But I think Starmer was very cleverly setting up lines for the future, as John just pointed out, which is that things like the windfall tax are very popular. And we are going to go into the next few months if, as is expected, tomorrow she announces this policy where she's essentially paying 130, 170 odd billion to subsidise the energy companies to not raise bills, where people are going to turn around and say, well, that's money that the government is paying. That usually comes back to me in taxes at some point, and that's going to these big energy companies who are making record profits.
And that's going to be the Labour argument.
Exactly, and that's
it's going to resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm a free marketeer. I defend the rights of big companies to make profits, but she's got to understand that there's a reason why we don't usually get prime ministers who stand up at PMQs and make powerful free market arguments. It's because they don't usually resonate that much with the electorate. And Starmer has set up a very clear dividing line between Labour and the Tories, and I wonder if she's not going to be able to demonstrate sufficient ideological flexibility in the weeks and months going ahead. Labour are going to plug away at that issue, and they're already 15% ahead in the polls.
Or to show the benefits of her policy.
Exactly,
which would be foreign direct investment, etc., but that's going to take time.
Yeah.
Not easy. William, thank you very much indeed for joining us. In a moment, we'll talk about 5,000 Albanians queuing up in Calais and Dunkirk to cross the English Channel. Suella Braverman is facing a very, very difficult job. We'll also talk about climate change and what it's doing to our weather, or not.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales
and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online. We're proud to be the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
So who won that first round in the House of Commons today? Your views. Jackie says Truss won the round hands down. Another says anyone could beat Starmer because he has no charisma or personality and no policies. Well, he may not have much personality. He may not have this little magical ingredient called charisma, but he very clearly actually now does have a big dividing line on taxing energy companies. And so I think henceforth we can't say Starmer has no policies. There's a very clear divide that's opened up, and it's going to be there right between now and the next general election. Neil says, Liz won on points, but Labour's argument about the burdens falling on taxpayers while energy companies reap dividends is a powerful point, and it's a Tory vulnerability. Neil, I agree with that. It is going to be, arguing that, carrying it through, it's going to be tough. I think it's right, but it's going to be tough. And Mike says, Liz won easily. Now, we are very, very used, are we not, to news about the Queen being happy news, but there's too much of it these days that is sad news. And this is, well, you must digest it as you want, but a palace spokesman tonight has said, after a full day yesterday, Her Majesty has this afternoon accepted doctors' advice to rest. This means that the Privy Council meeting that had been due to take place this evening will be rearranged. And for the Queen to miss a Privy Council meeting, she has really got to be feeling pretty unwell, I would have thought. I'm not trying to spread alarm, but, we've had this wonderful year with the Jubilee and everything else. We know the Queen is slowing down, but for a Privy Council meeting to be put off does give me some real, genuine cause for concern. Now, the weather. It always makes the news. The Brits talk about it constantly, of course, probably because we've got the best climate in the world, accompanied by some of the worst weather. But, of course, this year has been very, very dry, and for a couple of days, exceptionally warm. Screaming headlines that this is all because of climate change. Then I go to the Midwest of America. Floods, in which 29 died, and we're told that's because of climate change. We've got floods going on in Pakistan. A lot of people in desperate situation. That's climate change. The river in Wuhan is virtually dry. That's because of climate change. What you haven't heard is that we are now well into the hurricane season. Those tropical storms that originate in and around the Caribbean and often reach as far as Florida. So far, this is a 30-year low number of high winds and hurricanes that have taken place. Had we had a normal hurricane season, I've no doubt it would be all over the news, presented in apocalyptic terms. Well, I wonder why we treat weather like this. And Scott Duncan, meteorologist, is joining me. To start with, normally there are a large number of storms that become hurricanes originating in the Caribbean every year, 14, 15 every year. So far, maybe one?
Well, we're just on to number two. So going back to 2013 is the last time we had such a low period of kind of tropical cyclone activity. And you could say 14, 15 on average over a season if you take a ballpark figure over a long-term trend, for example, over a kind of longer period. But in reality, it's a lot more complex than that, and you can't really say it's a clear call to make even before the hurricane season begins. This year, there's high expectations for overactive hurricane activity, and that's associated with La Nina. So this year is not just quiet, but it's also quiet during a year you'd expect even more. And obviously, we've had quite a lot of interesting weather across the Northern Hemisphere this summer, which could be part of that. But certainly, this is quite a...
So if we can't predict with accuracy, despite all the satellites you guys have got, if we can't predict with accuracy the hurricane season in 2022, how on earth can we say how much the climate's going to warm up over the next 50, 100 years?
Well, there's actually good talk about hurricanes and their frequency and the cyclones themselves and their projection and the climate models that actually run them. In the IPCC report, they say that there's not actually a clear trend in them. Maybe the dynamics are becoming more intense where they form, or there might be fewer of them, but the actual impacts might be changing, or they might be forming at slightly different times of the year. But if you, for example, a good analogy, you could have maybe 50 millimetres of rain throughout a whole summer. If it all falls in one day, there you go, you've got your 50 millimetres, you could say, well, there's your summer's worth of rain. But obviously that's very different to if you had 1 millimetre every day for 50 days.
But good news never ever makes the news. You know, we haven't heard that it's been an exceptionally quiet, calm season, that we've not had hurricanes ravaging islands or threatening Florida. We never hear good news, do we?
I do agree that, yeah, when you have news stories, you couldn't really write themselves if you come to... For example, there are fewer than average hurricanes this year. That's not exactly the same as we've had 5 Category 5 cyclones going straight into Florida.
No, I get that. I get that.
So even if
but I'm confused, Scott. You know, the meteorology industry believes the Earth is warming, and most people in that industry believe that it's carbon dioxide that's causing it. Rightly or wrongly, that's what they believe. So help me. Does climate change means we're going to be drier or wetter? Because it seems to me that argument is used whether it's drought or flood. Which is it?
It'll come down to where exactly you're referring to. So in like a tropical cycle, like a hurricane example, if you have fewer hurricanes hitting the same place, then maybe the rainfall in that one place becomes less. But in the hurricane itself, like going back to this analogy of 50 millimetres of one day, you're more likely to drop like 2 metres of rain in a warmer climate. For every degree of warming, the atmosphere holds 7% more moisture. So when it's raining, it's more likely to pour, but it might not be always falling in the same place. So some things are actually harder to attribute to climate change. And I think windstorms like hurricanes are notoriously difficult. The trend isn't actually that clear.
Isn't the overall truth that actually we're not having more severe weather now than we've ever had throughout the last 50, 100, 200 years? We've always had devastating weather events. Nothing's really changed.
I think severe weather, people often think of things like windstorms, especially here in the UK. That's what we're famous for, really. And they're very difficult to say, well, is it getting windier? Are we getting these storms more frequently? And I would say I'm not quite sure. I've been looking at this for a lot. I'm very interested in it. I've been interested for a very long time. But things like heat waves and droughts like that, we are seeing a tendency for these type of events to become worse or extend or become more intense and break thresholds more frequently. But I think a lot of people kind of fall down on what is actual severe weather.
Yeah, and an elephant walked across the Thames in the mini ice age, and the Romans made red wine up at Hadrian's Wall a couple of thousand years ago. Just very quickly, Scott, what's the weather like for the next few weeks?
Well, we've got quite a lot of stuff going on in the hurricane. Put me on the spot here. Got quite a bit of hurricanes going on in the Atlantic at the moment. We've got that Hurricane Danielle. It formed unusually far north, and that's what's quite unusual about this hurricane season. It's the most intense in terms of cyclone energy to form north of 38 degrees north. So quite an unusual one. The North Atlantic's super warm right now. So that's quite interesting, and actually could be related to why things have been quiet further south in the Gulf of Mexico, for example. But we've got a lot going on at the Atlantic. We've probably got to keep our eyes to the western shores and just keep a heads up for a bit more of these thunderstorms we've had over the last few days.
There we are. More thunderstorms. That's what Scott tells us we believe in. Thank you for that very interesting debate. Now, we know that 2,120 people crossed the English Channel on Saturday and Sunday of last week, and they're busy boasting away about it on TikTok. Have a look at the latest stuff we've got being sent out in Albania. And some of them have been crossing on Monday and Tuesday. And look at the conditions. Look at the flooding in that dinghy. They're not looking particularly happy bunnies in that situation, but they're not going to come to harm because, of course, the French Navy escort them, in most cases, to the 12-mile line from the UK, where they're met by Border Force or RNLI. But, of course, it can go wrong. In bad visibility or on days when there are so many boats crossing that we simply, both the French and us, don't have the number of resources to track them. You know, we saw that disaster one day last year in the Channel. I'd been out, in fact, earlier that day when 27 drowned. It is only a matter of time before we have another major incident in the Channel. And GB News has learnt through intelligence that there are now approximately 5,000 Albanians around the Dunkirk and Calais area waiting to cross, and all they want is for the weather to calm down. And as soon as it does, you'll see more scenes, as you're witnessing on the TV at the moment, with full Border Force boats coming into Dover. It is only a matter of time. Now, you've heard of Extinction Rebellion, you've heard of all these different offshoots. Well, today, the What the Farage moment was Animal Rebellion were in Parliament Square. They were in Westminster, spraying white paint on walls, spraying white paint on the roads. Let's have a look at the pictures of that, gluing themselves to the roads. And their demand is that we stop eating meat entirely. We stop eating fish entirely. We move purely to a plant-based diet. So you've got Just Stop Oil, you've got Animal Rebellion, you've got Extinction Rebellion, you've got a group of people out there who genuinely think that billions of us are going to die over the course of the next few years unless we fundamentally change our behaviour. They are extreme. They are prepared to go to the most extraordinary lengths. I wonder, will any of them be prosecuted for criminal damage? I'd be very surprised if any of them got anything more than a slap on the wrist, which I think is utterly ludicrous. And don't they understand that plants have feelings too? Now, in a moment, I'll be joined by Lord Norton of Louth. He is an academic, said to be the greatest expert on Parliament in this country. He is a stout defender of the House of Lords. I am a keen opponent. We'll debate that over a drink in just a moment.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
on radio,
And online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
It is time for Talking Pints. I'm joined by Lord Norton of Louth. academic, said to be the country's leading expert on Parliament. Where did that come from?
It was an article in the House magazine many years ago. I think it was a book review of one of my review of one of my books, and the reviewer was saying, picking up on a point and saying, "Is this what our greatest living expert on Parliament should be doing?" That type of thing. So it took off from there, and it sort of, once it's entered the currency, everybody uses it, because how do we introduce him? Oh, it said he's a great, and so I know
Once you've got a brand,
absolutely.
No, keep it.
I always know what's coming up.
Now, a distinguished academic career, the youngest professor of politics in the United Kingdom. So you spent, your life, your adult life, and before, studying politics, studying Parliament, and of course, I guess our Constitution too.
Yes.
And because of all of this, you finish up in the House of Lords, and various surveys rate your influence over debate as having been quite significant. So well done you for all of that. But I'm a bit of a radical. Well, I am, aren't I? I mean, I am a radical. I mean, supporting leaving the European Union was considered to be an outrageous position, but it became a mainstream position. But, American friends of mine say, Nigel, how can it be that you're on your 4th Prime Minister in 6 years, and that 2 of them the British public have never, ever voted for? Our system isn't working very well, is it?
Well, it's working perhaps better than the one where you get your critics. I think there's far more to be said for a parliamentary system of government than the presidential, because that tends to be too rigid in terms of time, in terms of terms, and also the relationship between the president and the executive. You get that disseveration, and of course you get clashes. So there's no accountability. You might think of lots of elections, therefore accountability. But in terms of accountability for the outcomes of public policy, who does the electorate hold to account? Who is responsible for that particular output if it's a result of bargaining?
Well, I guess in America, the midterms are a barometer in a sense.
Well, that means, yes, but who are you still holding to account? Who holds the power? So it invites a clash between, say, President and Congress. So whereas across here, the parliamentary system, electors are in control ultimately, because the great thing about elections, I mean, it's Karl Popper's point. He made the point that the most important thing was about elections, really, was how can you peacefully get rid of a government? So we can get rid of a government, and the electors know why, because the government's responsible for public policy.
But here's the odd thing.
There's no other, the government can't say, not us, Gov. There's one body responsible for public policy, the party in government. It's got to face the electors at the next election, and it knows that. And it's accountable through the electors as a result.
But here's the bizarre thing. The bizarre thing is that actually we now have a presidential system at general elections, because we all vote for somebody we want to be Prime Minister, or against somebody we want to be Prime Minister. Isn't that the irony of where we are?
It would be if that was the case. We vote for a party that's...
No, we don't.
Well, yes, people don't go to the polls, I'm going to vote for X as Prime Minister. They vote for a party, because they've normally voted for a party, and they believe in that. And
I think that's changed.
It's changed to some extent, but it still gives you that sense of continuity. You've got parties fighting out. You've got party manifestos. So, and the leader needs to bring the party behind them. There is a problem in the direction of travel, in the sense that prime ministers are becoming a little too presidential, in the sense of acting as if they were directly elected, and they're not.
Yes.
And that's the problem.
Yeah, I know. It's a very odd situation we've got. Now, sticking with the House of Commons, postal voting. We didn't used to have postal voting.
No.
Before 2001, you had to have a good reason. You're 97 in a wheelchair, you're working abroad, rather as the French still have. The French have kept that. I mean, you want to vote in France, turn up on the Sunday and vote, as it was here, on a Thursday. Blair brought in PPERA, postal vote actually for the first goodness knows how many years, without even proof of identity or address, just ring up and ask for a postal vote. And I genuinely think there is widespread fraud and intimidation within our postal voting system, especially in some of the ethnic minorities. Isn't it about time? Why will no one deal with this?
Well, some are attempting to deal with it, and some of us did raise this problem when postal voting was introduced, because in effect it basically undoes the Ballot Act to provide for secret voting. This is the whole point.
Yes.
I made the point that the polling booth is secret, the living room isn't. So who can see how you're voting? It completely undermined the whole purpose of what the Ballot Act was about in the first place. So there are reasons to worry about it, and it lends itself to whether there's voting fraud or not, perceptions of it, because you feel, well, that could happen.
So should we go back to the old system?
We need to tighten up. Now, whether you can introduce more secure ways of voting, because it might not be postal voting, but online voting, and tighten up security. But you're absolutely right in saying there's a problem to be addressed in terms of the actual mechanism of the process, but the other point you're touching on is perceptions of the system, and of course you need to have confidence in it. So what do we need to do to actually ensure that people are confident about the system?
Yeah, and also, of course, you know, a Labour MP dies, the by-election's called, the nominations close within a couple of days, the postal votes go out the next day. The other parties haven't even had time to get ready for it, and 60% of the turnout is on postal vote, way before election day itself. That needs dealing with. Quick point on electoral reform, before we get on to the big one, the House of Lords. When Blair said to Roy Jenkins, go away and look at the electoral system, and Jenkins did it.
Yeah.
And he came back and said AV Plus would be a good system. You'd maintain the link. The man or woman would still represent Guildford, albeit Guildford would be 10, 15,000 more people, but there'd be a list, a top-up list, where any significant opinion that wasn't represented on the first past the post would get a voice in the Palace of Westminster. I think that's a very good system. Why has it never been adopted?
Because it's a very bad system. And there's a very good campaign against Jenkins and the AV report they produced, because, I mean, in a way, the reason they came up with AV Plus, it was a hybrid system because their terms of reference were basically incompatible. So they couldn't square, it was an attempt to square the circle with a system that wouldn't particularly work. So I say there's a very effective campaign, I know, because I was part of it, and I actually drafted the report in opposition to AV Plus, explaining what the problem was, or, if you like, in defence of our existing system.
So you'd stick with first past the post?
Yes. Yes. I mean, it comes back...
So how can I... Come on.
Well, it comes back...
How can I, as leader of UKIP, get 4 million votes and 1 seat? Is that a fair electoral system?
Well, it depends how you define fairness. And this is...
Come on. Well, no. I mean, in any reasonable person's mind.
Well, yes, it comes back to my point. What criteria are you using? You say, well, you've got X number of votes.
What looks reasonable?
Well, reasonable in terms of how do you choose who's going to govern? That's the key point. Now, if you go for...
Should our Parliament
not
represent big, significant views in this country?
It may represent views, but the problem is then the aggregate would work against having a government that's accountability, because you just have lots of parties. Who forms the government?
Well, we had a coalition from 2010 to 2015. I mean...
Exactly my point. You look at the problems there. What could people vote on at the next election? Because the programme for government was post-election bargaining. So there was nothing that was... the voters didn't have a chance to vote on...
I get that. I get your point, but you must see my point as well.
I can understand.
I personally feel aggrieved by the system.
No, quite. But my point is, if you like, it's a balance which is, if you like, which is more fair. You've got competing choices between your point about fairness in terms of spread of the vote, my point about fairness in terms of electors actually being able to choose the government or hold the government accountable, whoever's been in power, for public policy. Yeah.
Now, look, I think we should have a second chamber. I think a revising chamber is very sensible. Absolutely. Have experts either in the chamber or committees they call upon. Look at legislation, say to the House of Commons, you've been too hasty, you haven't thought this through, please have a rethink. Absolutely, the bicameral system, I'm with it. I think a House of Lords that is now stuffed with 300 of Tony Blair's mates, 250 of Cameron's mates, party donors. The whole thing stinks of corruption. It looks absolutely awful. If the British public were given a say on this, Lord Norton, they get rid of it tomorrow.
Well, they would, because, I saw a poll that said only 12% thought it worked well.
Yes.
But that's partly because generally people aren't aware of what the Lords actually does. It's a generalised perception, the sort you mentioned. Oh, it's all.
But who's in it? Who's in it? All their mates?
No. That's your point. I was going to pick you up because it's stuffed with.
Yeah.
So, and somebody said,
hundreds of them.
Well, exactly. We're a large house. We're too large. Now, on your basis, therefore, as you say, there's hundreds. Well, there aren't. You start naming the hundreds. You can start with a few names and then you'd run out. You then come into your point. It's the experts, the people who are appointed. So even if you look at the numbers, we are too big.
Yep.
We favour reform in the Lords. The government's the problem in not going along with what we're to do to reform the House.
What would your reform be?
Well, I've been responsible for some reforms because we got private members' legislation enacted, including the House of Lords Reform Act 2014. That's the one that allowed peers to retire, got rid of anybody who commits a serious criminal offence, got rid of anybody who doesn't attend.
That makes a nice change.
Yes, and anybody who doesn't attend for a session. So that was one. We got another one on expulsion and suspension the following year. And I've got actually a bill coming up this Friday, House of Lords Peerage Nomination Bill, which it's to put the House of Lords Appointments Commission on a statutory basis. But it does much more than that. It addresses some of the concerns you've touched upon in terms of transparency. So it affects numbers, independence, but also requires party leaders, if they're nominating peers, to give the Commission an explanation of the process, the criteria by which those names were chosen, to supply any other information.
Wouldn't it be easier just to have an elected House of Lords?
No.
1 7-year term, something like that. Maybe get people in there from all walks of life, elected on PR. Be far more representative, wouldn't it? And then they could choose expert committees.
Oh no, where do we start with all that? Because
we haven't got time.
Well, no, but it would then, because you're in conflict there with what you're prescribing and the attributes you've given to a second chamber. Though doing it that way would actually destroy those.
Well, not if you call on expert committees, etc. My view is it just looks corrupt. The whole thing looks corrupt.
That's what my bill's designed to address, because there's that perception, and we need to get rid of it. It's a bit like my point about postal voting. The answer to that, it's how people perceive it. We must address that. We are coming up with all sorts of ways of doing that. So we've had some achievements. We're pressing for more.
Well, if you
it's actually getting government on board to accept.
If you can make it a bit better than it is, you'll be doing a very good job. And thank you.
We're moving in the right direction.
For joining me on Talking Points. Thank you. We've got a little bit of time left. It's Barrage to Farage. Your questions. Peter asks, what are the benefits of being a member of the European Court of Human Rights? Post-war, there were lots of benefits to try and stop awful things happening, as happened in the 1930s and didn't reach the radar. Now, I think it's really rather outdated and it's not very useful. I'm in favour of leaving it. Lord Norton, in 20 seconds, ECHR?
Yeah, it derives a number of benefits in terms of, from an international perspective. You say we signed up to an international treaty, so and we are seen as a way of leaders in the field. We're responsible for drafting it
70 years ago.
Yeah, but it's carrying. We're still seen in that way.
Well, you see, the establishment view is different to mine.
I don't think we want to be in the same camp as Russia, which would be.
Oh, no. We're the United Kingdom. We can do our own thing. Last question. If you were Prime Minister, what would you do to solve the energy crisis? Well, supply. We must be self-sufficient in energy. It is a policy failure from Blair through Johnson that we're not, and we can be held hostage by anyone in the world. If the Ukraine war has taught us anything, it is you never know what's around the corner in life. Self-sufficiency, whether it's your own domestic household or your country, is really, really important. Well, it's been the end of a very, very interesting, quite exciting day. Liz Truss has certainly made her mark. I'm back with you tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. But now, over to Mark Stein.
Supply. Preach it, brother.
Thank you very
Nigel,
much.
You
No,
are
it's very good.
Absolutely right. And that was also a fascinating discussion, I thought, on the House of Lords. I'd like to go back to the House of Lords the way it was a century ago. There's too many of these ersatz peers running around now. There's thousands of them, and a century ago it was like 100 active peers. Great stuff. We'll try to keep it going for the next hour. The war on COVID, the war on climate change, even the war on Ukraine. Funnily enough, whatever the pretext, it all seems to wind up as a war on you. What's up with that? We'll get into that in the Mark Stein Show, all coming up after the weather.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest forecast from the Met Office. Over the next few days we'll see a mixture of sunny spells, scattered heavy and thundery showers, and particularly warm overnight as well. The reason for the unsettled weather at the moment is this area of low pressure. It has been with us most of the week and it isn't going anywhere quickly, remaining unsettled for many of us. And if we take a look at the details for the rest of Wednesday, we can see frequent showers blowing in across the south and the west, closest to the centre of that low pressure system. Overnight though, showers for most areas, perhaps some drier interludes across northern England, southern Scotland, but overall a warm night to come. Temperatures double figures for many, 12 to 15 Celsius. So a muggy start to Thursday morning. Some really heavy showers developing through the central belt of Scotland first thing. A Met Office warning in force here. Elsewhere, a mixture of sunny spells and scattered heavy showers as we go through the day. Some rumbles of thunder, hail in there, some disruption to travel is expected. And then temperature-wise, generally warm for the early part of September, low 20s for many, 22 to 23 Celsius across the southeast of England. Through Thursday afternoon and into the evening time, we're just going to have to watch this area of heavy rain moving in off the North Sea, affecting parts of northern England, southern Scotland. This pushing its way westwards overnight. Elsewhere during the early hours into Friday morning, we'll see a mixture of clear spells and still the risk of some scattered showers. Generally warm night again.